Spoilers ahead for Netflix and Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Script Department. Today I'm joined by Caleb and by Helen to lie back in the arms of Morpheus as we talk all things Sandman. But before we get going with that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of those many things. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, any of the places where you might find such wonderful content as this, probably the place you are listening to or watching it right now. So that's exciting for you. But don't forget, you can also buy us a coffee. We like coffee here at the Script Department. And so if you scroll down to this lovely description-y bit, you will find the option to buy us a coffee. It helps keep the Caleb's lovely looking lights on. Look at that. It's beautiful. The lighting and everything. I'm a pale imitation over here. So feel free to get involved there. I'm rushing through this because I'm excited to get talking about the Sandman today. Really interesting series, I think. This is Caleb, one of your this is your comic book. You love this in the comic book is what I'm trying to say. Helen are a little bit newer. We have not read those comic books, so this should be an interesting conversation. So Caleb, as the Sandman aficionado, kick us off. What did you think of this series?
Well, first we should end this, and you guys should just go read the comic book right now. But I guess we'll continue with the show. The show is it. So we've been waiting for this for a while. The Sandman audience, or comic book lovers. It's gone through a lot of production hell. There was a Joseph Gordon-Levitt adaptation at one point.
Oh, wow.
That fell through. But the comic book is so huge that it's been a long time. So coming from it at that angle, I was very pleased with how they handled this. It's not perfect by any means. It has a lot of faults and
sure.
But as far as adapting the comic, it's very faithful, and the changes that they do make for the most part are feel respectful of the source material. So yeah,
that's good. That's good stuff. Helen, the non comic book view, first thoughts and impressions. What did you make of it?
So I'd had a few mixed reviews of it before I started watching it, and they said that it was too dark, it was visually too dark, and generally too dark. But unfortunately, that just made me want to watch it more. And it did live up to the expectation, actually, and I felt that there were some good surprises in there, and I also felt that there were some strong storylines that I'd not seen for a while. So it was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I similarly I enjoyed it. I really liked it. I liked it almost despite it in a weird way because I enjoyed what they did, but there are some interesting structural decisions that were made in the writing of this show. And the thing for me is you can almost see it in the villains of this show, right? So the Corinthian is obviously this big overarching villain that we see pop up at the beginning, we see at the end. But then you have David Thewlis, I think is how you pronounce his name, his Dr. Destiny, whose name I didn't know until I looked it up on IMDb earlier on and cheated. And then, who popped up as kind of what I thought was going to be a much bigger deal in this series, and I think it's interesting because this is very clearly carved up into a few separate stories with a thin kind of Corinthian narrative running through it and a few callbacks to other things. I like and don't like that in equal measure for lots of different reasons, but I'd be interested to hear about what you guys thought of the kind of structure of that. Helen, what did you think going into it with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you there. There wasn't that typical kind of the villain, sort of is threaded through, and there were obviously sort of different types of villains that came and went. And I I really enjoyed the areas where we did see the Corinthian, and I thought that his presence and his motive and the way that he managed to manipulate things to his will was really well done.
Mhm.
But there was quite a big chunk of it where there was just no Corinthian,
Yeah.
and we were sort of led down another route. And I think it wouldn't have been. It would have made things sort of better for me if he had been more of a steady villain throughout.
I prefer Villian personally. I think that's a much better word.
Villian,
Villian, yeah.
beer.
Ella, do you agree?
Yeah, so I can speak it from the adaptation side again. So it's pretty interesting because you can see that there's a clear change of plot halfway through, and that's because volume 1 is the first half of season 1, volume 2 is the second half of season 1. And that's why there's this like change, this total directional change of story. And looking at the comic book, the Corinthian doesn't really come in until volume 2 for the most part. Everything's kind of laid out, but you can kind of see that they brought in the Corinthian a little bit before to make this feel more like a season arc, to give that the villain that you guys are kind of talking about. Whereas like this comic book starts out as a dark horror fantasy with these villains. They were trying to tie it into the DC universe, with some superheroes and Constantine. And so that kind of goes away from here on out. So like in the future, if we get to the next books and seasons, it starts to turn into a Shakespeare tragedy almost. So that's from adaptation point of view, that's what is going on, which is pretty interesting because I actually, whenever I was starting out in university, I attempted as a little exercise to adapt the first volume, and it was pretty similar, I would say. So, because I don't know if there's any other way to adapt, like logically thinking through, but so that's it. I don't know if it works as far as bringing the Corinthian in that early. It just kind of feels kind of ham-fisted in there. Whenever he does come in and bringing him in throughout. And John Dee's storyline kind of is about the same as the comic book. But yeah, so like there's the volumes feel like seasons. So it's kind of interesting that they took this all into one season. So instead of us having that mental break.
That's exactly, I think, what I was feeling there, and it's really interesting to hear that they are actually two separate stories in the books and comic books and things like that. Because I assumed, wrongly as it turns out, that this first season would be all about Dream finding his tools, and that would be, so we are kind of given this this tour of Gaiman's world, as it were, through Dream trying to find his tools, and it would be almost like a detective story. And he'd have to, he's got to go find Constantine, and Constantine's going to take him here, and then he's got to battle the devil, and he's got to, all of these things that happened, but were over a longer period of time. And I think then, and I feel as though that would have been the way to go. I like everything that happened in this series. I enjoy it from a story point of view. I think it's really great, but I think structurally, they missed a beat by not keeping these as separate volumes, because I think that the final kind of moment where Dream regains his power is kind of just a bit limp. It doesn't have that significance that you might expect it to have. And perhaps they're trying to subvert the sort of superhero-y DC kind of thing by not doing that. But you can see, the end of that moment where I have my whatever, and I've got my Sandman. And the big moment where the music soars and everything, and Lucifer's like, oh, Sandman, or whatever, and that you can see all these things happening. and they don't do it. Now, I respect that they're trying to do something different. I always respect anybody doing anything different. I just don't feel as though it quite works here. And I think that, so Dr. Testa, what's his actual name? What's his name in this? It's John
D
John D.
is like what they know. He's known as Dr. Destiny, which is like another DC villain,
Gotcha.
but this is this adaptation
John
of
D.
him.
Okay.
So
John D, I felt that whole business, he's such a great actor. And the character is so
Right.
compelling and it's so interesting. And that whole business with him sat in the car and he's talking to this poor woman who's like just trying to go home, and she's taken pity on this guy, and he turns out to be a massive, terrifying murderer. And I could have sat with those two in a car for way longer. And I could have sat with him for way longer. And you know, does she become somehow his accomplice? Or I feel like there's so much untapped potential in the first and indeed the second half of the season that I just don't know if it quite works. Am I missing? Am I being too judgmental, Helen? Come and redeem me. What do you think?
No, I think I do think Dr. Destiny, that one of my favourite episodes was where they were in the diner, and at first I thought, you know, oh, is this the episode where it needs to be low budget?
Yeah.
And they, you know, they're just kind of pedaling along through this episode, and it just kept building and building and building, and just when you think you know where it's going, it pulls it right back, and just became quite a shocking episode by the end. It was quite clever in how it did that, lulling you into this false sense of security and then throwing you down. And I really, really enjoyed the tension that he was able to bring. And I think that was probably a mixture of the brilliant acting, but also the way that scene unfolds, because it's, you know, as a complete episode, it's this one long scene, and I just thought that was really clever. And you're right, the car, the driving, when they were in the car together, you know, you can imagine, you know, you can just see this moment on her face when she realizes, actually, this is not a safe situation. I was right. I should have followed my instinct, and now what am I going to do? But I felt that her character was quite predictable in her movements, but I suppose that's good, because that's what you would do. That's realistic, isn't it, to a point? But yeah, Dr. Destiny was a very well constructed character, and he was played brilliantly, I thought.
And I think also the relationship with his mother as well, the way that I'm just jumping on your bandwagon here, Helen, because it really is that good. You know, the way that ties into the first episode and everything like that. I feel as though that arc, the arc of him recovering his tools and being captured, and the revenge against that family and all of that and that and the other that went on there, I just don't feel as though it was explored as fully as it should have been. And that, you know, it's funny you talk about it becoming a Shakespearean tragedy. I think that is a tragedy, and there you go. There's one for the quote book, because it is.
Wow.
I think it's a shame that it didn't go through that kind of and give it its due. That whole story, you know.
Yeah, in the comic, actually, not to be that guy, but
That's good.
in the comic, no, the John D actually kills that character. So the interesting thing that it's piqued my interest, is the things that they have changed. The comic book is very deliberate with how the first volume is Preludes and Nocturnes, is what it's titled as. And everything is laid out and given to you, or everything that's laid out and given to you comes back around in one way or another in this story. So their choice to not kill that character and also have it be a somewhat big actor from Ted Lasso makes me interested to see if they'll bring her back.
Okay.
Because they didn't kill that character. So I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
Perhaps there's a grand plan.
They could just throw it away.
Maybe that's the
the
deal.
Yeah.
Well, let's double back round to the diner scene, the diner episode, and also this is a very Gaiman thing, isn't it? The idea of these sequences and these kind of expositional moments that stand alone in a series. You look at Good Omens, for example. There's a great episode there or sequence there where they just follow the two, Tennant and Sheen's respective angel and demon. They just follow them through history for like half an episode. They just spend all of that time doing that, and we did that, and it's so great. And you just want to sit there and watch it, and just like, oh, what did they do then? Tell me what happened then. It's just like it's the most simple form of storytelling. It's just like, yeah, what happened next? And then you get that here as well, with the diner episode. But then later, when Dream keeps going back and meeting Hob Gadling, I believe his name is, the great immortal publican, and it's really interesting that I think that above anything else, going through time like that, showing the same place through time, and the changes of a person, and the kind of the philosophical thought experiment of these characters. It's exactly what you do. If you were an endless, like, not God exactly, but whatever the hell they are, if you were one of the endless, you'd play these games. You'd do all this. Of course you would. You're like, oh, I reckon they get sick of it. I don't reckon. Okay, immortal. Let's find out in 100 years. And I loved it. I will go back and watch that episode again and again and again. I just think it's so clever.
I agree. I really enjoyed that concept as well. I thought that was really clever.
Yeah.
It's almost like a time traveler type thing, isn't it? It's very good. The only thing I didn't like about it was Jenna Coleman's character, Constantine. They'd used her, and she looked exactly the same. She was just wearing period costume, and I felt that was a mistake. They should have made her even just like a little bit like she was several generations before. But that was the only thing about that storyline that I couldn't really get with. But that's down to casting, not the story.
Yeah. It's an unfortunate misstep on that one as well, because Jenna Coleman has had that happen to her in her first series of Doctor Who, and for which Gaiman also wrote. And there's a whole plot point about how she looks the same, and it's resolved by her actually being the same person, like addled through time, classic Doctor Who stuff. So I totally agree with you, Helen. It took me out of it because I went, oh, it's like that time. Maybe she's the same. Maybe she's the same person. Not the Sandman's fault in any way, shape, or form, but it is, something that struck me as well. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
that's one of the things that with the side stories that they have adapted, the comic book does that also, where there's just a bunch of vignettes and like it'll jump around in time, and so that's what I think they really did a good job of, is implementing those into the season. Some of them do happen with where the show put them in the comic. Some of them, like, they brought that one forward, I believe. And then because the Sound of Her Wings, like, section with Death is a separate one. And so, like, they've really brought them together to make sense as far as where to place those. And that was one of the things I was wondering, because there's whole volumes that are just short stories that don't have anything to do with each other.
Cool.
I haven't watched the very last episode yet, but I'm assuming that's the same thing happens there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that I feel like they succeeded in that, because I've wondered how they were going to implement that.
It's interesting you mentioned the that last little tag on there. And I won't go into it, but one of it's a halved episode, two stories in one episode, kind of two short films almost. But that the first episode there is animated, which I was just gleeful about. I love it when if you guys have seen Love, Death and Robots, the different animation styles that go through that, the kind of the wonderful anthology thing. I'm obsessed with anthologies and kind of changing stories slightly through those things. And I want, this appears to be a world that is ripe for anthology storytelling. And if there are lots of different stories like that, Do you think perhaps that Netflix are trying out a little maybe backdoor Sandman anthology pilot there? Do you think, or what do you think? Open question.
I think they had to keep that separate. That whole episode was, well, it almost felt it wasn't unrelated, but it was very different. It had a whole new set of characters, and I think to keep it separate, I think it needed to be very different. It needed to. The format of it needed to be different. I didn't actually know that those were extra episodes, and I spent the entire episode going, what the hell is going on? And then we went back to the last episode, and I was like, I don't understand what that episode was. So it wasn't until I looked it up that I realised. So if you haven't watched it yet, don't. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that comes down to the structure of how they're looking at implementing these anthology style short stories. One of them comes from there's a Japanese folklore run and I believe that the cat one is from that. So that's, again, just kind of them choosing where to place these, which feels like, to me, thought has gone into it, because there was one placed in the middle of the season, and then now this one came out after. If you watch it and you think it's still part of the season, it's going to make no sense, like Helen said. So, I think that the biggest success for me with this show is, despite the production or the directing issues, there's the subtext is there, just enough. There's the characters are there. I feel like we're understanding Dream's character pretty well, because that's kind of, obviously it's the Sandman, so and he's a very complex character that in the start of this, I feel like I didn't understand him very well in the comic, but I feel like it's coming through a little bit more early on in the show.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So, yeah.
He's a great character.
So that's, I think that, yeah.
Really interesting.
And the casting's great.
The casting's so great. His voice is just,
oh yeah, just don't tell my husband, but I'm a little bit in love with the voice. I could listen to that all day. I think and it's surprising as well. It doesn't look like it fits him, so it makes him otherworldly, which is really good.
Totally agree.
And I was really interested in how many of the characters turn things on their heads. Death being really happy and lovely and young and just gentle, and the Corinthian, being, whether the bisexual was, part of his kind of, I'm going to get what I want, so I have to do everything and anything to do that. And I loved that there was just so much representation. Desire was actually, I'm assuming, making an assumption that it, was male, was a transvestite, and I loved that the desire isn't just a female thing. And I really enjoyed the way that he also played with this, going slightly off from the casting, but that you could have a serial killer conference, and how that would look and what that would be like, and the ground rules that you need to have for that. And I just thought that was just such fantastic, imaginative, brilliant idea, and he could do a spin-off on that on its own, I think, if he hadn't killed them off. But yeah, the casting was really, really interesting. And I was going to ask you actually, Caleb, having not read the comic, are those characters, are they depicted in that way in the comic as well, or are they have they just diversified the casting for the TV show?
So I don't think Corinthian, we get way more of the Corinthian's character in this from what I remember. So we don't explore really anything but the idea of him being a murderer and kind of kickstarting the serial killer from history. And so with Desire, though, Desire's straight from the source material. It's kind of the Desire as an endless is kind of gender fluid because
Because I was
it's
Desire.
getting at this idea that it's yeah exactly. So like it's kind of more this idea, this entity. So yeah, that's definitely straight pulled from that, which is cool.
Oh, we didn't get enough of Desire. I could
I'm
sit
trying
and
to think of.
watch Desire just be maniacal. Like, oh, it's what
I
a
did,
great character.
I did think that was a shame, and it was almost a bit like we hadn't had enough of that character to kind of really feel the threat.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there was that hint. Yeah,
Because there was
but
just
it
that
wasn't,
one
was it strong
moment,
enough?
I think, wasn't there, where suddenly Desire's standing behind them on the road, going, "Oh, I'm going to get you, brother," or
Yeah.
something like that. That was it. And then the next
Yeah.
time we see Desire is in their like place and in their equivalent of the dreaming, and it was kind of like,
I
oh,
think
this person, I remember you, but what are you doing here? I agree. It's another one of those things where I think all of this, I think all of the criticism that I can bring to bear on this series, and it does sound as though I'm being really critical. I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. I want more and more and more. And that's kind of the point, is that I want more of this. And I feel as though we've rushed through a load of these things. I feel like Desire, you could have, bring in Desire. Bring it. I have no problem with the Corinthian coming in at the beginning and then being this kind of jumping in and out kind of villain who's there sometimes, there other times, perhaps encountering Dream and mocking Dream for not being able to do anything about him being around while he's looking for his tools. And then, have Desire doing a similar thing and all this, that, and the other. Just give me more. Stretch. Don't even stretch. Like, allow this story to fill up everything. I mean, I'm just repeating myself now, which is just nonsense. But like, it is.
Well, I think it's an interesting point that like, did they stay too close to the source material? Because like, at what point do they divert and make it a TV show?
Yeah.
Where you're wanting more, and you are kind of, or us as a viewer are, especially coming in with no knowledge, don't know of these characters, so we're barely getting anything, which happens. Screen time in the comic is basically the same as how they adapted it.
Yeah.
And so maybe that hurt the show, because maybe they should have written more scenes. Maybe they should have come up with other ways to make us know those characters more.
Maybe.
I think it's an interesting point.
It's a really interesting point in terms of adaptation, because there's a great story. I promise faithful viewers and listeners, I will not spend this whole time talking about the Lord of the Rings. I swear, I'm not that person. However, there is a relevant story.
You hack.
I know. I'm a hack and a shill. It's terrible. But the sorry, internet. But there is a great story about the development of those original 3 movies, whereby they were going all over Hollywood pitching 2 films. And they were going to condense the story down, and they finally got it in front of New Line, and New Line turned around and went, "Well, why would you do that? Why would you not do it in 3?" And I think there's a great wisdom there for that, which kind of runs counter to your point, I suppose, but kind of not at the same time. If you have a volume, then make the volume. If you have 2 volumes, 2 volumes. Why put the 2 volumes together when they clearly don't belong together? Do you know what I mean? I wonder if there's always wisdom to be found from the Lord of the Rings.
Is it? Well, and so that's interesting because like is this a Netflix thing, a streaming issue? Because like with a book, you have, like, say I'm reading volume 1, I know I can feel the pages on the right getting less and less, and so I know I'm nearing the end of that story. Whereas like on Netflix, like Series of Unfortunate Events did this too, where they combined like 3 books into one season, and they were like it was like 2-part episodes of each book or whatever. So I wonder, is it a mental thing?
Maybe.
Because like you kind of still clearly have this closure of like, okay, this is halfway through season one. Now the second half is starting, and it's a totally different story.
I maybe it is. Maybe it's a release thing. Maybe if they dropped volume one, I'm going to call it volume one, the first half of the season, and then they'd left like a week or so break, and then they'd release the other one. Maybe that would do it. But then it's clearly not written that way though. It feels like, I don't think we have two end-to-end 3-act structures bumping up against each other, or maybe we do. It feels like that it's a coherent series all in one.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
So maybe it wouldn't.
And even like the through line that I see there is Dream's character. His growth through this season is the one thing that sticks out to me. And almost too far. Like I feel like he's learning too quick, because he's not a good person, not a good endless at the start, and so it felt like at the end of this season with like the music rising and the like what he like him recreating is it Galt or some dream that's a nightmare into a dream. It felt a little too like a nice bow wrapped on
I
it.
agree. I agree. Whereas if that had been the
where
end,
we're at in the story,
whereas if that had been the end of the second season, no problem. If volume one had been brought into, what was it, 8 episodes of this? I can't remember, 10 episodes.
I think it's 10.
10. So if you,
barring the last one,
sure. So if you told this story over 10 episodes, or volume one over 10 episodes, and waited to make volume 2 over 10 episodes, so you're doubling the amount of time you got to tell the story. We have twice the amount of time that we're sitting with Dream, and we leave him. I think we kind of leave him in a good place there. I feel as though you could, and perhaps this is intentional, I feel like if they never made another series of Sandman, then it does feel largely resolved, and there's some good stuff. Maybe that's intentional. Probably is intentional. Let's face it. But
it's a big budget, I'm assuming.
Really big budget on this one. I don't know. I'm not sure. Perhaps we need to Great Hollywood rewrite it and really get into it on some occasion. That might be quite interesting. Though it's very good. It doesn't deserve the Great Hollywood rewrite treatment because it is very good.
There is, so with this, I kind of came to a revelation with watching this show.
Interesting.
Because I was thinking about the comic book and obviously Lord of the Rings we talk about a lot here, and the Rings of Power having just come out, and then this being adapted. These are like this having taken so long to adapt, and how do you adapt this massive story? The comic book won a bunch of awards. It's considered one of the greatest comic books of all time. You have Neil Gaiman writing amazing scripts for the comic. You have some of the best artists, like at that time, drawing. You have Dave McKean, I think is his name, who was doing the covers, which he did the end sequences, the end title sequences.
Oh, cool.
Those are all done by the cover artist for the comic. So he's a great artist. So you just have you have all of these creators at the top of their game. And I look at Lord of the Rings also, you have Tolkien writing the books and their masterpieces. You have the adaptation into the movies of everyone in the movie and working on the movie was operating at the highest level. And so that's why so many things that we love, I think it's source materials that we love, whenever they're adapted, fall through, because this cast largely is a lot of unknown people, which isn't a bad thing, but there's performance issues, there's directing issues, there's special effects issues. So it's not to have something that is one of the best in its medium and then adapting that and having it be good but not like amazing. I kind of came to this realization that like that's kind of where these letdowns happen, I think, because of all of uh, these translation issues, I think, into a different medium.
It's really interesting.
And so that's why I'm like, I'm okay with this, with how this turned out. It's enough. It's faithful enough. It's good enough for me to enjoy. Um, and that's why I'm happy. Like as a Sandman fan, I came out of this like, okay, at least it was good. So
That's great. I mean, it's really interesting. Adaptation is always a kind of a hot button issue. There's I realized the other day. Actually, your fault, Kelly, because you made me write down my five favorite movies of all time, and I realized that all of them are books. All of them are from books. There isn't a single original screenplay among them. And after my existential crisis that I had as a writer, I began to think about that and realized that actually it's because you, as a screenwriter, you come to, if you're adapting a book, you have the best treatment on the planet, like, to work from. You've got this expansive and developed, amazing story treatment to look at. And so, of course, these films are going to be brilliant. You look at things like the Shawshank Redemption. It's considered to be one of the best films ever because it's so detailed and wonderfully written in its original story conception. The Godfather, all of these wonderful movies that come from these things. It's a really interesting point, which kind of runs counter to what you're saying, I suppose, in that actually they sometimes don't live up to that. But I think it's important to consider these things as separate entities. Helen, do you have an adaptation woe that is that weighs heavily on you? Or
Yeah, I do actually. In 2020, Jack Thorne did an adaptation of The Secret Garden, and I don't want to speak ill of a writer, but he trashed it for me, and I loved the book. I've read the book to my children. I grew up watching the original film from '87, and I absolutely loved it. But the story, but I felt that the way that it was executed, he missed the point of quite a lot of the themes that were in the original story, and I could talk about it for hours and rant about all of the things that were missed. Then I think the thing about the adaptations is if you've seen an original adaptation or you've read the book or comic or whatever the source material was, you always have an emotional connection to that. And I think sometimes when it doesn't quite live up to the hype, it's sort of trashing your emotions a little bit there. And I think that's where we get stuck and so passionate over them.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think it's
well, and I hate to bring it up, but Rings of Power is a hot topic right now for people liking it and people hating it. And I mean, it's bound to happen, of course. But I think that's where this, like, the understanding of having artists come in once you go into film, like once you cross over into this medium, it becomes a massive collaboration. It's not just one person anymore. Yeah. So like that's something that I think we always have to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
it's
interesting. But I think there are times when it does actually work. So there's another adaptation of a book called The Scapegoat, which is a Daphne du Maurier book. And then I'm just trying to remember who the director was. But the ending actually in the book was terrible. It was wrapped up with a bow and it was very disappointing. But the ending of the film was so good and just really punctuated the character arc, and it was much better. Sorry, Daphne, but it was much better than the original in that sense. So I think there are sometimes it can work, but not always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with the Sandman, then is this overly adapted? Is this under adapted, or is it clinging too much to its roots? Then I think you made that point earlier, Caleb. Like, is this clinging too much to its roots, and is that a problem? And is it a problem? I mean, are we picking holes in a thing which really perhaps those holes don't exist, and perhaps there are, as you said at the top of this, there are issues with it. I mentioned structure and things like that, and we've kind of done that to death. But it's far from perfect. But are we finding fault because we as screenwriters like things to be a certain way, and this perhaps isn't a certain way? Is this kind of what we're doing here? What do you think?
I think it's not a blatant yes it's over adapted, because to me it feels almost like just right. From from crossing over with my knowledge, and maybe I'm too close to the source material so maybe you guys are the points that you bring up of like I wish I had more of this, or but I do wonder, is this is just season 1, so if we get more of this in more seasons, which if they follow the 2 volume per season structure, we'll have like 5 seasons.
Okay, that's cool. That's low.
It makes me wonder that, is this just the start of the story? Is that an issue, like an actual structure issue or writing issue of like we needed more character development to fully like believe Desire going after Dream, which again is kind of how it happens in the comic book. So maybe that is another place where they should have strayed from that and developed it more. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's a TV show, and that's what they're creating. So for me, it feels almost right. There's minor issues like that. But again, I think I'm just happy that I'm not sitting here saying I hate that this is a TV show. Yeah. So, yeah. What about you guys?
Helen?
Well, yeah, I'm really interested in seeing the relationship that he has with the Endless, because they are endless. It's not like you're going to defeat them and they're dead and then you move on. There's going to have to be some kind of resolution, whether that's tolerating each other or completely getting on with each other. And I think the only thing that I'm not looking forward to about it is exploring the relationship he has with the devil, because that felt like the battle that they had just felt defeated too easy, and I think the devil came across as quite weak, and I can't quite see how he would revisit that and get one over on him. So I didn't enjoy that storyline. I think so. I'd be dreading that one coming back.
Which is interesting because that you say that, because that storyline is a lot of people's favorite. So I think that's.
Oh. No, I didn't.
Yeah. Well, sorry. What's to come?
Yeah.
The next, okay, like the cliffhanger where we're going next is a lot of people's favorite. So yeah.
I think that this is great, and I love it. I want to know more about the wider world. I want to know more about the Endless. I want to know more about, because they reference God a couple of times. I want to know what relationship these characters have to God. We see again. I find it really interesting when these mythologies are explored and these religions are explored in this kind of way. Again, to cite Neil Gaiman again, Good Omens, and way earlier than that, there's a film that apparently cannot be found anywhere because the licensing's such a nightmare. But Dogma, the Ben Affleck, Matt Damon movie from many moons ago, is another great example of Christian mythology and lore being explored through story. And It's something that always fascinates
Yeah.
me. And this is what I mean. I want to know more about how these relationships work. I want to know how how the mechanics of this world work, because it's clearly all worked out. You can feel that working underneath all of this, the very, very definite rules and law and all this, that, and the other. And so yeah, there's a big nerdy part of me that just wants them to lay it all out. And maybe I'll go read the comics and maybe I'll learn it all. But
I highly suggest
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And us as writers, this is the Sandman is a story about stories, and Dream's character is the Lord of Stories. Is one of his hundreds of names that they call him throughout. But yeah, like, so it's and that's what I love about these vignettes that they bring in, these short stories. Yeah, it's great.
Love it. Guys, I think we did it. The Sandman is on Netflix right now. It's great. You should go watch it. I mean, you've obviously watched it. If you got this far through the video or the audio, then you've watched it already. So let us know if you agree or disagree.
Go read the comic.
Go read the comic. There you go. There's the plug we can give. Go read the comic.
There you go.
There you go. The
yeah, that's the next job for sure. Thank you both for coming along today. It's a really, really interesting conversation. We'll have at some stage we'll slate a slightly deeper conversation on adaptation, because I think there's a lot of this around at the moment, and it would be great to really unpack that and be able to talk about things like the Rings of Power without feeling as though we're straying into forbidden territory. So we'll do that at some point. If you guys are interested, then chuck it in.
It's a safe space.
Yeah. Chuck it in the comments if you're interested. Until next time, think about liking, think about sharing, think about subscribing. It's so helpful to us. If you like what you hear here, what you hear here. If you like what you hear here, then here, I say, marvelous. Yeah, I mean, this is going on way too long. Thanks, guys. We'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.